The death clock that every empire has to face, the laws of physics are just as strict and exact as the patterns that history follows. We like to think that our civilization is unique and better than the empires that came before us in terms of intelligence, progress, and technology. We tell ourselves that the United States is the most important country, safe from the same things that turned the Roman Forum into a cow pasture and the British Empire into a second-tier regional power. But history doesn't care about how great America is. It cares about patterns, and the pattern of empires is very scary. Sir John Glubb, a British military officer and historian, looked at the lifespans of 11 major superpowers over the last 3,000 years in 1976. He found a statistical pattern that is too consistent to be a coincidence, starting with the Assyrians in 859 BC and ending with the British in 1950 AD. The average lifespan of a global superpower is almost exactly 250 years. No matter where they are, what race they are, what religion they are, or what technology they use. This is Glubb's constant. It is about the same as 10 generations. You could almost set a timer to the pattern because it is so reliable. In 1776, the U.S. declared its independence. That date plus 250 years equals 2026. We're not getting closer to the deadline, we live inside it. We need to know the order of things to understand where we are. Empires don't just fall apart for no reason. They go through a specific 7-stage biological life cycle. They start out violent, grow through industry, reach their peak in wealth, and die in decadence. This is the 7-stage collapse pattern. Once a civilization starts going through it, it almost never goes back. The age of pioneers is the first stage. This is the blast. It's marked by a surge of bravery, energy, and taking chances. It's a small group of people, often persecuted or pushed to the edges, who all have the same goal and are willing to give up their lives for it. Think of the early American settlers conquering the wilderness or the Macedonian armies under Alexander bursting out of Greece. There is no wealth, just hunger. Religion or ideology keeps the people in this society disciplined, stoic, and together. The age of conquest is the second stage. The pioneers win by taking land and beating their enemies. This stage is marked by the growth of the military and the strengthening of borders. The United States was in the middle of the Mexican-American War, the rise to continental power, and the idea of manifest destiny. The military is the most respected group in society, and the country is united by the glory of growth. The age of commerce is the third stage. The empire puts down the sword and picks up the calculator because it has safe borders and a lot of new resources. This is the time when big businesses and making money are at their peak. Instead of taking over land, the focus is now on building infrastructure. Railroads are built, factories go up, and trade routes are set up. Society still values hard work and getting things done. What a man can make or build is how he is judged. This was the United States from the Civil War to the 1950s. It was the arsenal of democracy that made half of the world's steel and oil. Stage 4 is the age of plenty. This is the top. It's noon. The money made during the age of commerce flows into society. The quality of life goes up a lot. The fight for survival that defined the pioneers is now a thing of the past. People in Stage 4 have never been hungry or invaded. They think that being rich is their birthright and that they don't have to do anything to keep it. This is America in the 1990s, the unipolar moment when history was supposed to end and the stock market only went up. But this is the snare. During the age of affluence, society's virtue slowly starts to fade. The focus goes from the group to the person. The youth's goal changes from honor and service to fame and money. The empire's cancer is planted here, hidden under the shiny facade of endless GDP growth. We are now out of Stage 4. Stage 5, the age of intellect and decadence, has violently begun in the United States. Glubb noted that when an empire is at its best, it becomes obsessed with academic theory and bureaucratic complexity, which makes it less able to do things. We stop building bridges and start talking about the sociology of bridges. We make more lawyers and fewer engineers. The education system changes from teaching people how to think to teaching them what to think. The most dangerous thing about Stage 5 is that the economy is becoming more and more like a business. This is the exact way that the Spanish Empire fell apart in the 1600s and the British Empire fell apart in the 1900s. Take a look at Spain in the 1500s. They ruled the world. They found the Potosi silver mines in Bolivia and sent tons of silver back to Madrid. They were very rich, but they forgot how to work hard because they had so much money. Why build a factory when you can just buy things from the Dutch? The economy of Spain fell apart. They turned into a country of bureaucrats, speculators, and consumers who lived off the riches of the New World. They had no industry to support them when the silver finally ran out. They had given up their ability to make things in exchange for inflation. Take a look at Britain in the 20th century. They were in charge of the world's money. The pound sterling was the world's reserve currency, but they fell into the stage 5 trap of thinking they could build a global empire on debt. They borrowed money from the U.S. to pay for 2 huge wars and build a huge welfare state. By the 1950s, the interest they had to pay on their debt was hurting their economy. They had to lower the value of the pound, get rid of their navy, and accept that they were now a second-tier power. They didn't lose in the war. They lost on the balance sheet. Today, the United States is showing all the signs of stage 5. We have made our economy so financialized that it makes the Spanish Empire look well organized. Less than 10% of U.S. corporate profits came from the financial sector banks, trading firms, and insurance in the 1950s. It's close to 30% now. We don't make things anymore, we trade items. We make derivatives, we make debt safe. We now have a hedge fund instead of a steel mill. We've cheapened our money to pay for our excesses, just like Rome did in its last days. The dollar has lost 98% of its buying power since the gold window closed in 1971. We have printed tens of trillions of dollars to pay for wars we didn't win and social programs we can't afford. Like late-stage Byzantium, our society has broken up into tribes that are fighting each other. The common goal of the Age of Pioneers is no longer there. We in a zero-sum cultural war where people who disagree with us are seen as threats to our very existence. The age of intellect has not yielded wisdom, it has caused paralysis. We argue all the time while our infrastructure falls apart and our debt grows. There isn't a slow slide from stage 5 to stage 6. Most of the time, it's a cliff. Stage 6 is the age of decline. It is marked by the loss of reserve currency status, the breakdown of internal order, and the rise of a rival power that shows how weak the empire is. At this very moment, we're on that edge. The world is watching the U.S. use the dollar as a weapon, which is driving countries into the arms of the BRICS alliance. They're keeping an eye on our debt, which is now over $36 trillion. They're keeping an eye on our internal conflict. Even if we don't want to, they know what stage we're in. The rule about 250 years isn't a prophecy, it's a diagnosis. And the diagnosis is terminal unless we know what the symptoms are. We are the heirs of Rome, standing in the forum, arguing about whether angels are male or female while the aqueducts dry up and the Visigoths gather at the Danube. Stage 5 is the age of decadence, when morals and intelligence fall apart. Stage 6 is the age of decline, when the empire's machinery breaks down physically and systemically. This is the time when the bad things that happened in the last era finally catch up with them. We are no longer dealing with problems that are only ideas. We're talking about physics. The bridges fall apart. The grid goes down. The planes crash to the ground. The intellectuals and bureaucrats who inherited the complicated systems that the pioneers and builders made can no longer keep them running. Joseph Tainter calls this diminishing marginal returns on complexity in his important book, The Collapse of Complex Societies. Adding a new layer of government or a new technology can help solve problems and make things better in the early stages of an empire. But as society gets more complicated, more regulated, and more burdened by administrative costs, every new solution actually uses more energy than it makes. Check out the healthcare system in the United States. It takes up almost 20% of GDP, making it the most expensive in the world. But life expectancy is going down and chronic diseases are getting worse. We have more people in charge than doctors. There are more compliance officers than nurses. This is a classic sign of stage 6. The parasite is now bigger than the host. The bureaucracy doesn't exist to help the people, it exists to help itself. The same thing is happening in the defense industry. We spend more on defense than the next 10 countries put together, but we have a hard time making enough basic artillery shells, and our naval ships are rusting in dry dock, waiting for repairs that take years. The arsenal of democracy has turned into a place where cost-plus contracts and DEI seminars get stuck. This competence crisis is deadly because it takes away the one thing an empire needs to stay alive: legitimacy. People put up with inequality in Stage 3, commerce, and Stage 4, affluence, because the system works. You may have more money than I do, but the roads are paved, the police catch criminals, and the money stays the same. The social contract breaks down in Stage 6. The citizen looks around and sees a government that takes 40% of their income in taxes, but can't protect the border, fix the potholes, or keep the subway safe. This makes people go back to tribalism. People naturally go back to smaller, more dependable groups when the government doesn't keep them safe and in order. They get together based on their race, religion, political party, or where they live. The identity of the country goes away. We stop saying we are Americans and start saying we are red state or blue state. The empire doesn't just fall apart. It breaks apart. But the thing that always makes this happen is fiscal dominance. At this point, the national debt is so big that it tells the government what to do with math. The United States is currently paying more than $1 trillion a year in interest on its national debt. That's more than what we spend on the Army. We spend more than that on Medicare. We've reached the point where we have to borrow money just to pay the interest on the money we already owe. In Stage 6, the central bank is no longer free. The Federal Reserve can't stop inflation by raising interest rates anymore. If they raise rates to 10%, which is what they need to do to stop inflation, the interest on the debt would take up all of the tax revenue, and the U.S. government would go bankrupt right away. So the government goes with option B, financial repression. They make the central bank print money to pay off the debt. They keep interest rates lower than the rate of inflation. This takes away the buying power of savers and gives it to the government. It's a default that happens slowly. You go to bed with $100 and wake up with $100, but that money only buys $80 worth of food. Rome did the same thing when they lowered the value of the denarius. They didn't say, "We're cutting your pay." Instead, they paid them in coins that were 5% silver instead of 90% silver. The empire is falling apart from the inside, and outside threats are starting to circle. Stage 6 of every historical cycle is when a rival power rises up to challenge the hegemon's monopoly. The Germanic tribes and the Sassanid Persians were the enemies of Rome. The US and Germany were Britain's enemies. The BRICS alliance is important to the United States today. The rest of the world knows we're in Stage 6. They read the same books about history. They know about our debt. They can see our split. And they're acting in a reasonable way. They're taking away the risk. This is why China is selling U.S. bonds. That's why central banks are buying so much gold right now. They're getting ready for the Suez Crisis. The British Empire officially came to an end during the Suez Crisis of 1956. Britain tried to show its strength in Egypt, but the U.S. said it would crash the British pound if they didn't back down. Britain realized it was broke and had to back down in shame. It's likely that the American Suez moment won't be a war. It will be about money. It will happen when a big auction of U.S. Treasury bonds fails, when foreigners refuse to buy our debt, and the Federal Reserve has to print $1 trillion in one afternoon to keep the country from going bankrupt. That's when the dollar stops being a reserve currency. That's when the unfair advantage comes to an end. The risk of Stage 6 is that the ruling class, afraid of losing power, will always turn to authoritarianism. Glubb said that, in the end, empires become obsessed with everyone agreeing. Disagreement is seen as treason. Stage 5's welfare and entertainment are replaced by Stage 6's spying and censorship. The push for central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, is an example of this. If they were to happen, the government would have complete control over every transaction. We can see it in how social media is censored. The empire that is dying tries to keep itself together by force because it can't do it through shared values or wealth anymore. Right now, we are in the space between Stage 6 decline, and stage 7, collapse. A shock like a war, a pandemic, or a financial panic usually starts the transition. The weak system just can't handle it. It took a long time for the Roman Empire to fall. It fell apart for 100 years before it broke. In 1980, the Soviet Union, another stage 6 victim, seemed unbeatable. It had a huge army and thousands of nuclear weapons. It was gone by 1991. It fell apart because its economy was fake. Its leaders were old and senile, and the people stopped believing the lies. The question isn't, will the cycle end? The cycle always ends. The question is, what happens to the person when the empire starts over? The scary thing about Glubb's model is that it doesn't just predict the decline. It also predicts how quickly the collapse will happen. This leads us to stage 7, which is the age of collapse and the Seneca Cliff. The Roman philosopher Lucius Annaeus Seneca once wrote to a friend, "Fortune is of sluggish growth, but ruin is rapid." This idea has been turned into a mathematical model by modern systems theorists known as the Seneca effect. Star systems, corporations, and empires are all examples of complex systems that tend to grow slowly and over hundreds of years, gaining wealth, territory, and complexity. But when they fail, they don't go down the mountain as quickly as they went up. They fall off a cliff. The dissolution is growing at an exponential rate. The building that took 300 years to build can work fine on Tuesday, be shaky on Wednesday, and be gone by Friday. The Soviet Union was an example of this. The USSR was a huge superpower in 1985. It had a space station, a huge nuclear arsenal, and a KGB that scared the whole world. On Christmas Day 1991, the hammer and sickle came down from the Kremlin for the last time, and the country literally disappeared from the map. It didn't take decades for the collapse to happen. It took less than 6 years for perestroika to start and then end completely. People who had spent their whole lives waiting in breadlines for government-subsidized food suddenly found themselves in a hyper-capitalist free-for-all, where the ruble was worthless and oligarchs were stealing state assets. The Seneca Cliff killed them. They had normalcy bias, which is a deadly mental defense mechanism that makes us think that tomorrow will be just like today because it always has been. The United States is unlikely to experience stage 7 as a foreign invasion or an abrupt Mad Max-style apocalypse. History shows that it will show up as balkanization and simplification. Balkanization is the process of breaking up a large, ungovernable group into smaller, hostile, but easier to manage groups. The American states are already starting to break away mentally. A wealthy, tech-savvy person in Austin, Texas, and a person who relies on the public sector in Chicago, Illinois, live in 2 different countries with 2 different economies, 2 different legal systems, and 2 different moral frameworks. This separation becomes official in stage 7. The federal government is broke and can't pay its debts, so it stops providing services to the outskirts. The U.S. turns into a bunch of regional fiefdoms, some of which work well and are successful, while others are failing and out of control. The map may not change, but the situation on the ground does. The law of the land becomes the law of the land. The economic result is that things get simpler. Joseph Tainter's theory of complex societies says that when a society can't afford its own complexity anymore because of debt and energy costs, it has to simplify on its own. This means that global supply chains stop working and are replaced by local ones. In January, you stop eating avocados from Mexico and start eating potatoes from Idaho. You stop getting cheap plastic furniture from China and start fixing what you already have. The quality of life goes down and it doesn't come back up. The imperial way of life, which was paid for by the reserve currency, goes away. So, how does a person live after an empire falls? The first step is mental. You need to get rid of your normalcy bias. You have to accept that the path is set. The debt won't be paid. There will be no healing of the division. The money will never be worth anything again. You stop trying to bail out the ocean and start building a lifeboat when you realize the ship is going down. The next step is to cut off money. If the empire's main way of controlling things is through money, and that money is going through a hyperinflationary death spiral to pay off debts, you need to leave that money. You need assets that don't have any risk of losing value. Gold is the money of kings and countries. It's the only thing you own that isn't someone else's debt. When the dollar resets, gold will probably be the way to get to the new system. In the digital age, Bitcoin is the money. It's a lifeboat that lets you move your money across borders and keep it safe from being taken or devalued. If you have your own keys, it's the only thing in all of history that can't be taken away. Land and energy are the things that keep you alive. In a localized economy, the new aristocracy is the person who makes food or energy. You want to own things that can help you make things like farmland, a water source, or a solar array. You want to own things that actually work, not just paper that says they do. The third step is to use geographic arbitrage. In stage 7, your home determines whether you live or die. You should live in a place that respects property rights, has little debt, and makes its own food and energy. You want to stay as far away from the imperial core as possible. This is where the dense, debt-ridden cities are that depend on the complicated supply chains that are falling apart. Stage 3 cities of commerce have turned into Stage 5 cities of decadence, and Stage 7 cities of despair will follow. Go to the edge. Go to the place where the pioneers are moving. The most important thing to learn from the 7-stage pattern is not to give up. It's a chance. Civilizations change, but empires die. The fall of Rome was a disaster for the Roman government, but it was a good thing for the provinces that were being taxed to death. The fall of the British Empire hurt the aristocracy in London, but it led to the American century. This is the biggest transfer of wealth in history. The money is moving from the paper economy to the economy of hard assets. The state is becoming less important and the individual is becoming more important. It's going to the south of the world. You don't have to be a victim of the cycle if you know how it works. You can choose to be a pioneer in the new era instead of a loser in the old one. Instead of holding on to the world that is dying, you can set your family up to do well in the world that is coming. The last code of history's algorithm is running. The clock that has been going for 250 years is striking midnight. The empire is over, along with the... That part is up to us, though.